It began not with a royal press release, not with a somber televised statement, and not with whispers from palisades. No, the unraveling of this latest royal nightmare began with a single ping. A notification. A video alert sent across the vast digital underworld and into the public eye like a live grenade thrown into a glass palace. It came not from the British press, not from the corridors of Buckingham Palace or the strategy rooms at Clarence House. It came from Tyler Perry. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. A man who had once opened his home and shielded the Duke and Duchess of Sussex when they fled the UK, Perry had long been seen as a silent benefactor, quiet, supportive, and loyal. But on a day that will be remembered not just in tabloid headlines, but in the personal diaries of those closest to the royal power structure, Perry did the unthinkable. He released footage. Footage that claimed to show Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, in an intimate moment with a man known globally not for his royal connections, but for his work in the adult film industry. The setting, a high-end private club off the coast of Los Angeles. The time, allegedly during a period when Meghan was supposed to be preparing for her next philanthropic engagement. The shock was instant. The internet didn't crash, but it cracked. For the British royal family, already bruised from years of infighting, public spats, tell-all interviews, and an exile that split a nation's heart in two, this wasn't just another scandal. This was seismic. And for Prince Harry, who had stood by Meghan through every storm, who had abandoned titles, tradition, and the only life he had ever known, the betrayal, if true, was personal. It wasn't just about optics. It was about loyalty, identity, and the very foundation of the home he had built far from the crown. Within hours of the leak, Prince Harry boarded a private jet. No press statement, no official acknowledgement, no prearranged public appearance. Just a frantic dash from California to Heathrow under the veil of urgency and despair. By the time his jet touched down in the UK, speculation had reached a boiling point. Why had Tyler Perry released the footage? Why now? Was it authentic? Was Harry blindsided? And most crucially, what was the reaction behind the thick stone walls of Windsor and the historic chambers of the monarchy? This video will take you behind the headlines, beneath the surface, and into the heart of a story that threatens to redefine everything we thought we knew about Harry and Meghan. You'll hear about the silent power struggle playing out in media boardrooms, the hidden club scene where the footage was said to have been filmed, and the whispered messages that began pouring from palace insiders in the hours that followed the scandal. But most of all, this story is about a prince in crisis, a man who gave up the world he was born into to protect the woman he loved, only to now face a question more painful than any royal exile. What if she wasn't who he thought she was? Imagine devoting your life to shielding someone from an institution you believed was trying to destroy her. Imagine facing the fury of a nation, of your family, of your legacy, only to discover that the betrayal may have come from the inside. These are not just tabloid fantasies. These are real questions now being asked across media outlets, social platforms, and yes, within the royal family itself. As we peel back the layers of this crisis, we'll examine Tyler Perry's decision to go public and what may have motivated him. Was it revenge? Was it protection? Was it a warning to Harry or a desperate bid to control a narrative that was slipping out of reach? We'll look at the man in the footage. The alleged porn star whose sudden fame has sparked both condemnation and sympathy, and examine how he fits into this royal soap opera. Who introduced him to Meghan? Was it a setup? An innocent moment taken out of context? Or something more calculated? You'll hear about the club where the footage was filmed, an exclusive venue so secretive that phones are typically confiscated at the door. How did the footage escape? Who had access? And was Meghan aware she was being recorded? The palace's silence has been deafening. There's been no official comment from King Charles, no word from Prince William, and no public reaction from Meghan herself. But sources close to the royal household have described the mood as tense, frozen, and devastating. Staff have reportedly been put on lockdown. Internal investigations have begun, and behind the scenes, there are murmurs that this scandal may be the final straw in a relationship already hanging by threads. And then there's Harry. Is he coming back to defend Meghan? Or has he finally reached his breaking point? Some sources say he's in talks with senior royals. Others say he's seeking legal counsel. Some claim he's been seen staying at Frogmore Cottage, alone, but nothing is confirmed. And that uncertainty is perhaps the most tragic part of it all. In the hours following Harry's arrival in the UK, the media has descended like vultures. Paparazzi have taken up positions outside royal residences, security has been visibly increased, and royal watchers around the globe are bracing for what some are calling the Sussex Reckoning. This video will not rush to judgment. It will not pander to gossip or exploit pain, but it will uncover facts, explore motives, and dig deep into the emotional wreckage of a scandal that could destroy what's left of Harry and Meghan's credibility, and perhaps sever Harry's final emotional ties to the world he once called home. So buckle in. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a scandal, it's a human drama. It's a clash of love, loyalty, betrayal, and power. And by the time we reach the end of this story, you may find yourself asking the same question haunting Harry's mind right now. Was the truth ever really on his side? This is the beginning of the unraveling, and we're only just getting started. The press tried to play catch-up. Within minutes of Tyler Perry's bombshell, major networks scrambled to confirm authenticity, and speculation surged like a tidal wave across the globe. Commentators debated whether the footage had been doctored, whether it was real, and if so, what it meant not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the future of the monarchy. But behind the media theatrics, a far more intimate and painful story was unfolding, one that couldn't be captured by headlines or broadcast debates. For Harry, this was not a public relations emergency. It was a personal implosion. The face he wore when stepping off that plane back in London was not the defiant, confident Duke seen in Oprah interviews or Netflix documentaries. It was something far more raw. Reports suggest he was tight-lipped, pale, and visibly shaken. He moved swiftly, avoiding waiting photographers, escorted discreetly by security through a back terminal. No smiles, no statements, just a man haunted by something bigger than he could control. Inside Buckingham Palace, phones buzzed without pause. Staff who had been with the institution for decades reportedly described the atmosphere as one of contained panic. There was no established protocol for this level of exposure. Infidelity rumors have plagued the royal family before, but never like this. Never in the digital age, and never involving a duchess who had become as divisive and unpredictable as Meghan Markle. There were whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, that King Charles immediately summoned his most senior advisors. The crisis was already spinning out of control, and the monarch was said to be furious, not only at the embarrassment of the tape, but at the fact that this could once again eclipse everything the royal family had been working to recover from. The friction with Harry, the Queen's passing, the new era Charles was attempting to usher in. Now, everything was buried under a scandal of global proportions. But perhaps the most compelling and tragic question wasn't being asked aloud by the press or pundits. It was echoing in the minds of those who still believed in the love story of Harry and Meghan. If this footage was real, if it was recent, if it was more than just a smear, then what does that mean for everything they claim to stand for? For the sacrifice Harry made when he walked away from it all, not just the palace, but the life of a prince. A man doesn't give up titles, tradition, and duty lightly. He does so out of conviction, or, in Harry's case, love. So what happens when that love is shaken? What happens when your escape from a toxic system becomes a prison built on half-truths? People close to the couple have long speculated that cracks were already showing. Differences in long-term goals, frustrations over their media strategy, and increasing financial pressures were reportedly wearing them thin behind closed doors. But no one predicted a bombshell of this scale, not even their closest allies. Tyler Perry's role in all of this remains puzzling. Why would someone who gave them sanctuary turn on them so publicly? Some insiders believe the fallout between Perry and Meghan began months ago, when deals linked to their media empire began to sour. Others suggest Perry may have felt used, manipulated into playing a savior role, only to be discarded once the Sussex brand moved on. Whatever the reason, the decision to go public with the footage was deliberate. It was targeted, and it was devastating. Sources close to Perry claim he wrestled with the decision for weeks, that he sat with legal teams, advisors, and friends before choosing to expose what he believed the world had a right to see, not out of malice, but out of a moral obligation. That Meghan had, in his words, crossed a line no friend could justify. Whether this was Perry acting out of betrayal or guilt or righteous anger is something we may never fully understand. But one thing is clear, the timing was surgical. The leak didn't come during a lull in the news cycle. It came on the eve of a major royal charity event. On the anniversary of a speech Harry once gave praising Meghan as the most honest soul I've ever known. It came when public trust in the monarchy was tentatively recovering and when Meghan and Harry's brand, though bruised, was beginning to rebuild through new ventures. Perry's choice of moment was not accidental. It was a statement, and its implications were devastating. The footage itself, described in detail by several who've seen it, is difficult to ignore. It allegedly shows Meghan laughing intimately with the man in question, with physical closeness that would be difficult to frame as innocent. The club, known for its stringent no-phone policy, is now under scrutiny. How was the footage captured? Who had access to the camera? Was it a hidden recording, a breach of privacy, or something staged for leverage? Legal teams on both sides are now engaged. Threats of lawsuits, defamation claims, and digital takedowns have flooded social media. But as with most things on the internet, the footage spread far and wide before anyone could pull the emergency brake. The damage was done. And yet, in the midst of this firestorm, Meghan herself has remained almost completely silent. No social media posts, no public appearances, no press releases, only a single cryptic message posted through a spokesperson. We will not be responding to malicious lies designed to divide and distract. But the message, rather than calming the waters, seemed to stir more doubt. If the footage is fake, why not pursue legal action immediately? If it's real but misunderstood, why not offer an explanation? Silence, in this case, felt like confirmation. And for Harry, thrust once again into a media war zone, there is no playbook. He has lost his buffer. He has no press office, no security team from the palace, no machinery to manage this. He is a prince in title only. And in this moment, a man abandoned by the very systems he once ran from. Behind closed doors, royal insiders say he is devastated, that he has been seen pacing alone through the grounds of Windsor, that he has spoken only briefly to Charles, and that William, his brother, once closest confidant, now estranged, has refused to comment on the matter altogether. Some insiders say Harry is seeking a temporary residence in the UK, possibly in the hope of negotiating a longer stay. Others claim he has requested a private meeting with King Charles, one that may determine the final course of his royal future. What's unfolding now isn't just a tabloid story. It's a Shakespearean collapse. A marriage, a monarchy, and a man are unraveling before the eyes of millions. The questions posed are no longer about loyalty to a crown, but about loyalty to oneself. About what happens when personal truth collides with public scandal, and whether redemption is possible once trust has been obliterated. By the end of this story, we'll examine every angle. We'll look at the real cost of fame, of betrayal, of trusting the wrong people. We'll explore whether Harry can ever truly go back, either to Meghan or to the monarchy. And we'll ask whether this moment marks the death of the Sussex dream or the rebirth of a man who finally sees the truth. It was the kind of morning that began like any other, with quiet routines and ordinary headlines, until everything changed. The world didn't realize it was standing on the edge of a digital earthquake until it was already shaking. When the notification hit, it didn't whisper. It screamed. Millions of phones buzzed at once. A file, marked with a name that no one expected to see in this context, Tyler Perry. And attached to it, a short clip. Grainy, dimly lit, but unmistakably provocative. At first, people thought it was a joke. A deep fake. Another smear. But as the seconds passed, as faces came into view, the silence that followed was deafening. There was no mistaking the woman in the footage. The angle wasn't perfect, the lighting poor, the sound muffled. But the profile, the voice, the gestures, people who knew Meghan Markle's face, her expressions, her laugh, knew it instantly. And the man? Shirt unbuttoned, muscular, tattooed, charismatic in a way that felt both raw and unmistakably inappropriate for the company he was keeping. His identity emerged within hours, an adult film actor with a long list of controversial credits and a reputation for mingling with celebrities in private, no-camera events. This wasn't just a case of suggestive optics. This was footage of what appeared to be physical closeness. a hand brushing along a leg, an intimate whisper, a moment of laughter where two bodies leaned in, lost in private conversation, inches from contact. And all of it taking place in a members-only club infamous for discretion and celebrity secrecy. A place where phones were banned, entry was limited to invitation-only elites, and the rule above all was privacy. So how did this tape escape? The footage was brief, just under 3 minutes, but it was enough to set the internet ablaze. Conspiracy theories sprang up immediately. Some said the footage was old, from years before Meghan had even met Harry. Others said it had been taken out of context, a friendly interaction painted as something else. But the most damning analysis came from digital forensics experts consulted by media outlets within hours of the leak. One tech publication noted the metadata embedded in the video suggested a capture date only months ago. Another confirmed the background music playing in the clip was from a live DJ set dated within the last 6 months. Every small detail tightened the noose around the narrative. As for Tyler Perry, he remained silent in the initial hours after the tape surfaced. That silence gave the story more power. People wondered if his social media had been hacked, if the tape had been stolen. But by midday, a statement arrived. It was short, cold, and it changed everything. I can no longer stay silent while the truth is hidden. What you've seen is real. I stand by its release. Just 20 words. But 20 words that shattered the illusion of a united front. Perry had not only confirmed the authenticity of the tape, he had endorsed its exposure. And that single decision took the drama from speculative scandal to verified betrayal. What could possibly drive someone who once protected the Sussexes to such a public rupture? The answer, according to insiders close to Perry's circle, had been building for some time. Behind the scenes, their once close friendship had begun to fray. There were disputes over projects, delays in joint philanthropic efforts, and Perry's growing discomfort with how his image was being used in media appearances without his direct involvement. More than one source claimed Perry felt sidelined by Meghan and Harry after his role as their post-royal protector had been fulfilled. But motive alone wasn't enough to justify a leak this damaging. Which is why many began to ask whether Perry had been holding the footage for some time, waiting for a breaking point, or if it had recently come into his possession under more complex circumstances. One source, who requested anonymity due to personal ties with Perry's team, revealed that the footage had come to Tyler through a third party, a club staffer who claimed he felt uncomfortable with what he saw and what he heard that night. According to this source, the staffer had been quietly documenting activity in the club for months, not for blackmail, but out of fear that something unethical was happening behind closed doors. It was this individual, reportedly, who approached Perry after discovering Meghan's identity in the footage. Whether that version of events is true remains up for debate. But what's clear is that Perry, at some point, made the conscious decision to go public. Not with a scandal, but with what he considered a truth that the world, and most painfully Harry, deserved to know. The media explosion was instantaneous. British tabloids jumped on the story with an eagerness not seen since the Oprah interview. American outlets, often more cautious in royal affairs, followed suit. TMZ, Page 6, The Daily Mail, CNN, Sky News, even major broadcast anchors, all scrambled to contextualize the footage. By day's end, news tickers around the world carried variations of the same line. Tyler Perry releases intimate footage allegedly showing Duchess Meghan Markle with adult film actor in private club. But while headlines screamed and news desks churned, the most profound reaction came not from the media, but from viewers. Social media erupted with disbelief, rage, sadness, and vindication. Hashtags like #MeghanScandal, #HarryComeHome, and #SussexCollapse trended globally. Thousands of posts poured in by the hour. Some defended Meghan, crying foul and calling the release a smear campaign. Others condemned her, calling for the stripping of her titles, questioning her authenticity, and demanding that Harry return home to the UK without her. What cut through all the noise, however, was a deeper, more tragic thread. Posts from fans who had believed in Harry and Meghan's love story, who had defended them through every wave of backlash. Now, those same voices were shaken, conflicted, heartbroken. One post, which received over 1.2 million likes in 12 hours, read, "I believed in them. I believed in what they stood for. I wanted them to win. But if this is true, then what was it all for? The sentiment reflected the core of the issue. It wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. It was about narrative, identity. The idea that Harry and Meghan had sold to the world, that of a modern, inclusive, emotionally honest couple, was now being questioned at its foundation. Was it all performative? Was it strategy? Or had something truly changed in the years since they fled the royal system? And where, in all of this, was Harry? In the early hours following the leak, reports were conflicting. Some claimed he was blindsided. Others said he had seen the footage weeks earlier, but had begged Perry not to release it. A few suggested Harry had confronted Meghan directly and was met with evasive explanations and counteraccusations. What is confirmed, however, is that within 12 hours of the tape going viral, Harry had boarded a flight back to London. No entourage, no publicist, just a private security detail and a backpack. According to flight manifest leaks, the plane left from Van Nuys, Los Angeles, and landed at Heathrow under an alias. The urgency of the trip made headlines in itself. There was no scheduled engagement in the UK, no official event or appearance. The only thing waiting for him was fallout. What awaited him in Britain remains partly unknown. But one insider, close to royal logistical planning, claimed that upon landing, Harry was immediately taken to a secure location near Windsor Castle. Not to the main residence. Not to his former home at Frogmore. A neutral site. One used in the past for emergency royal briefings. There, according to multiple reports, he was met not by his brother or his father, but by aides. Senior palace staff tasked with coordinating press strategy, legal responses, and private security. Their task wasn't to comfort Harry. It was to manage a crisis. A royal scandal that, for the first time in decades, involved a member of the monarchy and explicit footage that couldn't be dismissed as rumor. What was said in that room, we may never know. But what followed in the next 24 hours would be a chain reaction that no one, perhaps not even Perry, could have predicted. Some stories break in the daylight. They announce themselves loudly with blaring headlines, orchestrated press statements, or scheduled exclusives. But this story was born in darkness, in the dim shadows of a club not known to the public, far removed from the polished halls of Kensington or the sunlit walkways of Montecito. It happened, if the timestamps and eyewitness accounts are to be believed, on a night when no one was watching. Or so they thought. The club was called Vesper, not listed on Google Maps. No sign at the entrance. No website. Just a black door in a brick alleyway behind a nondescript row of buildings in Los Angeles' most elite neighborhood. To the average passerby, it looked like the service entrance to a hotel. But to those who mattered, Hollywood producers, billionaires, oil heirs, political power players, and yes, celebrities both current and faded, it was the epicenter of a carefully maintained secret world. A place where power mingled with pleasure, and where discretion wasn't just expected. It was enforced. Phones were banned upon entry. Devices were placed in sealed signal-blocking pouches or checked at the door. The staff underwent monthly security briefings. No one could work there without a background check and NDA. Cameras were disabled inside. Even bartenders signed confidentiality agreements. That's why what happened there that night was never meant to be seen. Yet something went wrong. The date, according to metadata embedded in the footage and confirmed by a security staffer who later spoke to an unnamed journalist, was a Saturday night in early spring. Warm enough for light dresses, cool enough to invite coats draped over shoulders. It was not a public event. No red carpet. No VIP list on display. Just the usual. Select names texted a passcode, and an invitation-only link disappeared after 5 minutes. Meghan Markle, according to those same sources, arrived just past 10:30 p.m. She didn't come through the front alleyway like most guests. She entered through the kitchen service door, common practice for A-list visitors. Wearing a simple black cocktail dress, hair loose, heels low. Her security team stayed outside. Club rules demanded no private security inside the main area, only the venue's own vetted staff. But Meghan knew the space. According to a staff member who remained anonymous but provided verified details, it wasn't her first visit. Inside, the room wasn't large, but it was designed to feel infinite. Velvet booths with shadowed corners. A DJ suspended on a raised glass platform above the bar. Mirrors everywhere, but slightly fogged to distort reflections. Lighting was moody, seductive, always shifting. Conversation had to happen at a whisper, not because of volume, but because of the intimacy the space demanded. The man she was seen with arrived approximately 20 minutes later. He was known to some of the staff, not just because of his fame in the adult industry, but because he had been banned once for bringing a hidden device inside. That ban had apparently been lifted months earlier. His name doesn't matter for the story, not because of privacy, but because what unfolded wasn't about who he was. It was about what their interaction represented. To the eye, he was charismatic, confident, flirtatious. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who didn't need to prove himself. And when he reached Megan's booth, she stood to greet him with a kiss on the cheek. She smiled. They laughed. Eyewitnesses vary in their accounts. One claimed they looked like old friends reconnecting. Another said the chemistry was unmistakably romantic. A third, a bartender who had worked that section before, insisted it looked more like a business conversation than anything personal. But what none of them denied was that they stayed close. Close enough to touch. Close enough that even without audio, their interaction radiated familiarity. The footage that would eventually go viral captured only a sliver of this encounter. Less than 3 minutes. But what that footage didn't show, what happened in the hours that followed, paints a more complete picture of the night. They shared drinks. Not many. Megan, according to staff, stuck to sparkling water with lime. He ordered tequila. They remained in the booth for nearly an hour. At one point, they moved to the dance floor, not to dance, but to be closer to the DJ, who was reportedly a friend of Megan's. There, under the strobe lights and haze, their silhouettes blurred into the crowd. A brief touch on the arm. A moment where their heads leaned together, lips near ears. It was intimate. Not necessarily incriminating, but unquestionably personal. At 12:17 a.m., Megan reportedly exited through the back kitchen door again. Her security rejoined her. She didn't speak to the man again after leaving the dance floor. She didn't say goodbye to staff. She just left, quiet and calm. The man remained for another hour. It could have ended there. A secret night. A whispered evening between two people in a club built for silence. But someone didn't follow the rules. Someone, staff, member, or guest, had recorded a portion of the interaction using a hidden pin camera. The device was concealed in a jacket lapel, not visible to the naked eye, especially in the low lighting of the club. According to later analysis, the footage was filmed from a seated angle across the room. The lens captured only a partial view, but it was enough. When the footage made its way to Tyler Perry, it came wrapped in tension. The club staffer who allegedly provided it claimed to have done so out of conscience, not for money. He told Perry that what he had seen that night didn't sit right, especially given Megan's public image. Whether Perry hesitated is unclear, but what is known is that he viewed the footage multiple times, showed it to at least 2 close confidants, and reportedly confronted Megan about it directly. That confrontation, if it occurred, remains shrouded in speculation. But several insiders suggest it ended badly. There are claims of raised voices, a broken friendship, silence that stretched for weeks. And then, the leak. What makes this story more than just tabloid fodder is the calculated way it was buried until it wasn't. Megan's visit to the club was never publicized. No photos, no paps, no mention in any influencer's social feed. For all intents and purposes, it didn't happen, until the footage said otherwise. Now, questions are being asked that cut to the heart of her public persona. Why was she there? Was it just a social outing, or something more? Why meet a man known primarily for his work in adult entertainment? Why that club? And why did no one in her team try to preemptively get ahead of the story, even after rumors started circulating weeks before the leak? Some claim she believed Perry wouldn't dare release it, that their friendship was too strong, that he owed her. Others suggest she was blindsided, that she didn't know she was being filmed, didn't remember the night in detail, or didn't see the interaction as inappropriate. But Harry, reportedly, did. According to a royal aide, Harry saw the footage privately before the leak. Tyler had sent it to him with a message that simply read, "You deserve to know." That moment, the aide said, broke something in him. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just stared at the screen, stunned. The reason Harry flew to the UK wasn't just to escape the noise. It was, reportedly, because he needed space. Space to think, to ask questions, to remember who he was before all of this, and perhaps to figure out who Megan really was now. The night at Vesper will be analyzed for months, maybe years. Every gesture, every second, every whispered moment will be dissected. But the truth is this. Even if nothing physically inappropriate happened, the damage is done. The illusion is shattered. The secrecy of the night, the nature of the club, the man in question, all of it adds up to something that feels like betrayal. Not in a story like this. Not in a scandal attached to royalty. Not in the orbit of a duchess whose public image had been carefully shaped around compassion, feminism, and virtue. And yet, there he was, at the epicenter of the firestorm, caught in a club's swirling shadows, leaning into whispered laughter with Meghan Markle. His name wasn't aristocratic. He didn't come from money or title. His empire had been built on flesh, not family. And when the world found out who he was, it didn't flinch. It gawked. The man in the footage, now universally known as the porn star in the room, is not unknown to Hollywood, nor to its darker corners. His name, while we will withhold it here out of narrative focus, exploded across trending searches within an hour of the leak. His online presence, already sizable within adult entertainment circles, quadrupled overnight. Interviews he'd given years prior about his unusual entry into the adult industry resurfaced. Clips, photos, and tabloid history began circulating like wildfire. He was no stranger to scandal, but never one of this magnitude. Never connected to royalty. Born and raised in Southern California, his early life was reportedly unremarkable. A working-class background. A brief stint in the military. A failed acting career before being scouted by a producer for a niche adult film agency. What followed was a meteoric rise in one of the world's most controversial industries. He was known for his charisma, not just his physique. Directors described him as disarming, respectful, and unusually intelligent for someone in the business. Fans described him as raw, unfiltered, and deeply aware of his image. He gave interviews. He spoke openly about his work. He was unashamed. That made him different. And it also made him dangerous in the world Meghan occupied, where image control wasn't just strategic, it was everything. The night at the club wasn't the first time he had been seen brushing shoulders with celebrity. Photos had circulated in the past, usually dismissed as coincidence, of him at fashion afterparties, music release events, even film premieres. But this was different. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate proximity. And as more details emerged, it became evident that the connection between him and Meghan may have gone back further than the club. According to industry insiders, the man had been on the guest list of multiple high-profile LA events over the last 2 years. Private ones, curated dinners, discreet gatherings hosted by entertainment elites looking to relax outside the spotlight. Meghan, who had attended similar circles as part of her post-royal networking efforts, was allegedly present at 2 of the same events. While that alone proves nothing, one name kept popping up in connection to both. A powerful Hollywood publicist known for bridging celebrity with edgier influencers. That publicist, whose client list includes actors, models, and provocative content creators, was said to have introduced the two informally at a private dinner in Malibu. Witnesses from that dinner, who spoke to reporters under anonymity, described the interaction as charming but brief. Meghan had asked questions. The man had answered them with wit. One attendee recalled that Meghan laughed loudly at one of his stories and seemed genuinely fascinated. No numbers were exchanged. No overt flirtation. But the seed had been planted. He had made an impression. Fast forward to the night at Vesper. A club like that does not operate on happenstance. People are invited for a reason. Guests are pre-approved. And yet both Meghan and this man appeared on the same night, in the same booth, sharing a moment that, according to the footage and accounts, went far beyond casual pleasantries. So what was he doing there? And more importantly, why would someone like Meghan, married to a prince, under constant scrutiny, willingly risk proximity to a man whose name alone could ignite a tabloid frenzy? That question haunts the entire scandal. The simplest explanation is also the most unsettling. Perhaps she didn't see it as a risk. Perhaps she felt invincible. For years, Meghan and Harry had crafted a narrative of siege. The couple was under attack, fighting against the press, against the institution, against a royal machine that had tried to control them. In the public's imagination, they became underdogs, symbols of liberation, rebellion, and authenticity. But with that underdog status came another danger: insulation. The belief that their truth was unshakable, that their enemies were always on the outside, that anyone who questioned them was part of the problem. And in that kind of bubble, perception warps. Boundaries shift. Rules bend. A drink at a club with a controversial figure becomes a harmless night out. A laugh, a whisper, a moment of contact, easily explained away. Until it isn't. In the days following the leak, the man in the footage initially declined all interview requests. His agent issued a single sentence: he will not be commenting on private social interactions. But the silence didn't last. As pressure mounted and offers increased, he broke it. In a podcast interview released just 3 days after the tape exploded, he addressed the situation with surprising calm. He didn't deny the meeting. He confirmed it happened. He admitted they spoke, laughed, shared drinks. But he was careful. "We didn't cross any lines," he said. "At least, not the ones people are assuming." She was charming, smart, curious. Nothing happened that should cause this kind of meltdown. The host pressed further. Were they friends? Had they met before? Was there more to the story? He smiled. "I'm not going to say we're close," he answered. "But let's just say, the world's a lot smaller than people think." The clip went viral. Some interpreted it as a coy confession. Others saw it as bait for attention. But what couldn't be denied was the way he carried himself. Not as a man in crisis, but as someone aware of the power his role in the story held. And that, perhaps more than anything, fueled the fury behind the scenes. The royal family, according to sources, was livid. Not just at Meghan, not just at Perry, but at the sheer absurdity of the moment. A man whose career centered around adult content was now tangled with the crown. And not just in theory, in reality. The reputational damage was incalculable. And for Harry, the humiliation was sharp. The contrast between him, a veteran, a mental health advocate, a man raised in the strict formality of palace corridors, and this man, whose life was a carnival of lust and scandal, couldn't have been more dramatic. Reports suggest Harry watched the podcast interview alone, that he refused to speak afterward, that he closed the laptop, poured himself a drink, and spent hours walking the grounds of a private estate near Windsor. No phone, no aides, just silence. The question he must have asked himself over and over again wasn't about the footage. It wasn't even about the man. It was about Meghan. Did she know who she was meeting? Did she understand the optics? Did she care? And if she didn't, what did that mean? This story, explosive as it is, was never about sex. It was about choices, about credibility, about image. The man in the room was just a symbol, a living reminder that in a world governed by perception, proximity can destroy you. In the days since the scandal, he has leveraged the spotlight into new opportunities. Interviews, social media surges, a forthcoming memoir, now being shopped around with the working title and censored. It's opportunistic, yes, but also strategic. He knows this moment won't last forever. And while Meghan scrambles to protect her brand, he has nothing to lose. But there's a darker undercurrent to his rise, one that points to a deeper fracture in our culture, that a man who built his name on exposure can find power in shame, that he can outmaneuver the very machine meant to keep him on the fringe, that he can walk into a scandal, shrug, and walk out richer. What does that say about fame? About royalty? About the people we choose to elevate or destroy? As Harry retreats further into silence and Meghan maintains a defensive posture, the man at the center of it all continues forward, unburdened, unapologetic, and strangely triumphant. He may not have broken the crown, but he cracked something in it, and the echo of that crack is still ringing. There is a silence that follows betrayal, not the silence of calm, but the silence that comes after a building implodes. A stillness where dust hangs in the air, and all you can hear is your own breathing, ragged and uneven. That's where Prince Harry was the moment the truth could no longer be denied. The footage, the podcast, the statement from Tyler Perry, each hit like a punch, but they didn't come all at once. They arrived in staggered bursts, drawing the pain out over hours, like a slow-motion demolition of everything he'd built. In the early hours after the video surfaced, Harry was reportedly in Montecito, at the private Sussex residence nestled behind rows of trees and high, impenetrable fences. Security had already heightened. Media vans gathered a few blocks away. Meghan was said to be in another room, fielding calls from her PR team. There were no loud arguments, no visible breakdowns. But inside Harry, a quiet war had begun. This wasn't just an image problem. It wasn't just a personal embarrassment. For Harry, this was an existential unraveling. He had walked away from the royal family, from his birthright, from a system that had shaped every breath of his childhood and young adulthood, all for her. Not just for love, but for survival. He believed she had saved him, rescued him from a palace that had, in his eyes, crushed his mother, distanced him from his father, and nearly broken him. Meghan had become not just his partner, but his cause. And now? Now the very foundation of that decision was collapsing beneath him. Those close to Harry say that when he saw the footage, whether for the first time or in its final, leaked form, he didn't move for several minutes. He simply sat, hands clenched, eyes wide, staring at the screen. One aide, speaking anonymously, described it as the moment the room went cold. He didn't curse. He didn't shout. But his face, usually expressive, was vacant. He looked not like a man in shock, but like someone watching the final scene in a tragedy they didn't realize they were part of until the end credits rolled. Meghan, reportedly, tried to explain. She denied anything inappropriate had happened. Said it was a setup. Said the man meant nothing. That the footage was a distortion, a cheap ploy to manipulate public perception. But the explanations bounced off the walls. Not because Harry had stopped listening, but because he had stopped believing. It's a peculiar kind of betrayal, the emotional kind. There are no bruises, no broken windows. Just the knowledge that everything you thought was real might have been a mirage. That the person you defended against the world may have been keeping a piece of themselves behind a locked door all along. For Harry, the internal collapse began slowly. He left the room, walked outside, spent hours on the property grounds, according to staff, without shoes, pacing along the gravel paths like a man retracing memories. No guards, no calls, just long, uneven steps in the dark. At one point, he sat on the edge of the pool for nearly an hour, fully clothed, head bent over his knees. By morning, the decision had crystallized. He needed to leave. Not for a vacation, not for a planned visit, but for something deeper, something more desperate. A return to the only place he'd known before Meghan, Britain. Home, or what was once home. He made the call to his private security team first. No announcement, no press coordination, just a direct order: prepare the jet, clear the route, get me out. Within 6 hours, Harry was at the airfield. A lone figure in a baseball cap and hoodie, sunglasses hiding the storm in his eyes. Witnesses say he didn't speak to anyone except the pilot. His security team followed orders like soldiers. The plane took off just before sunset, heading east, chasing the sun he once greeted on royal tours, in military deployments, in carefree summers at Balmoral. Now, it was just a direction, a destination away from the noise, away from her. The flight itself was quiet. He didn't sleep, didn't eat. Instead, he stared out the window for hours, watching clouds drift past like ghosts of a life he'd left behind. For a man who once traveled the globe with royal luxury, this flight felt different. Hollow, stripped of meaning. And then came the landing. Heathrow was still. Early morning. Gray skies. Security moved quickly to shield him from waiting eyes. There were no flashes, no shouting photographers. His arrival had been masked under a fake name, a flight manifest disguised with layered aliases. But even then, word got out. By the time he exited the terminal, rumors had spread like wildfire. Prince Harry back in UK, the headlines read. But none of them knew why. Not yet. He was taken to a secure royal estate. Not Buckingham Palace, not Kensington, not even Frogmore. A satellite property, one rarely used. Inside, senior aides were already waiting. Not with sympathy, but with briefing folders. Digital tablets. Prepared statements. They needed to know how to handle this, what Harry wanted to say, what the palace should say, if anything. But Harry didn't answer. Not at first. He asked for a room alone. And then, for 12 hours, no one heard from him. What went through his mind during that stretch of isolation can only be guessed. But those who've known Harry closely say it's not difficult to imagine. He would have revisited every decision. Leaving the family, the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir, the speeches, the tears, the accusations, the statements made in defense of his wife, the rift with William, the conversations with Charles that never seemed to find closure. All of it. playing back in cruel reverse. And over it all, the face of the man in the video. Not a royal rival, not a tabloid journalist. A man whose career was everything Harry had rejected. A symbol of the very culture Harry had spent years fighting against. At some point during those 12 hours, Harry placed a call. To whom remains unknown. Some believe it was to Charles. Others say it was to one of his oldest friends, someone outside the media sphere, someone who could offer something other than damage control. But whoever was on the other end, the message was likely the same. I don't know what to do. That vulnerability, so rare in a man raised by duty and protocol, was the first crack in the fortress he had built since leaving the monarchy. And for once, there was no public statement to lean on. No carefully worded Instagram post. No Netflix documentary monologue. Just silence. Meghan, still in Montecito, released a brief message through her PR team. There is nothing to address. The story is fabricated and designed to harm. We will not engage. But the statement, detached and clinical, rang hollow to many. For supporters, it lacked the fire she was known for. For critics, it was confirmation of guilt. And for Harry, it seemed to mark a new kind of distance between them. A refusal to acknowledge the emotional wreckage, the betrayal, not of image, but of trust. In the following days, Harry remained in the UK. No official meetings. No media appearances. He was seen only once, briefly, walking the grounds of a royal property, alone, his face expressionless. Some insiders claimed he had reached out to Prince William, that he wanted to speak, to mend things, to find a piece of himself that had gone missing in California. But William, according to those close to him, refused the meeting. Too much had happened. Too many lines crossed. And so Harry stayed alone. The collapse wasn't a single moment. It was a slow suffocation. A realization that the life he built, the brand he defended, the woman he trusted beyond all else, had brought him here. To a cold estate, a fractured family, a scandal that felt too surreal to name. This wasn't the fairy tale they'd promised. This was something else entirely. And as the dust settled, the world waited. Would Harry return to Meghan? Would he speak out? Would he retreat into silence? Or would he, for the first time since leaving the monarchy, consider going back, not to her, but to the only world that still had room for him, if he was willing to ask? These were no longer questions of loyalty. They were questions of identity. Because sometimes, when your world collapses in real time, the only thing left is to ask who you really are, and who you were before it all began. The jet sliced through English airspace like a dagger, cold, sleek, purposeful. Its landing wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The storm it carried had already begun to swirl long before its wheels kissed the tarmac. On board was a man torn in two. Not a prince in ceremonial garb or a polished public figure on a philanthropic tour. Just Harry, exhausted, silent, caught in the raw aftermath of a betrayal that didn't just wound him. It unstitched the very identity he'd spent the last 5 years building. The air was thick with morning fog when the plane touched down at Heathrow. It was barely 6 a.m., but security forces were already positioned. This wasn't an official royal visit. No press coverage had been arranged. No welcome contingent stood by. And yet, a silence more powerful than any military salute greeted his return. The silence of a kingdom watching a prince come home in shame, confusion, and heartbreak. The jet taxied into a private hangar usually reserved for dignitaries. As the door opened and the boarding stairs descended, a handful of black-clad security officers emerged. Then, slowly, Harry appeared. Head down, shoulders slumped, sunglasses hiding the heavy toll of a sleepless flight. He moved quickly, brushing past handlers without a word. There was no time for formalities, no appetite for protocol. This was not a triumphant homecoming. It was an emergency landing in the truest emotional sense. Waiting at the edge of the tarmac was a convoy. Not royal limousines, not police escorts, but unmarked black SUVs, arranged not by palace command, but through discreet private coordination. The destination, a remote royal estate located miles outside of Windsor. It wasn't one of the famous residences. It wasn't Frogmore Cottage, now more a relic than a home. It was a quiet, stone manor used historically for sensitive royal transitions, a place where decisions were made out of public view. The drive took under an hour. Harry didn't speak during the ride. One aide later remarked that he looked like a soldier returning from a war no one else could see. His eyes were open but distant, fixed on the passing hedgerows and stone walls as if searching for something that no longer existed. Perhaps it was a version of himself, or perhaps it was the remnants of the trust he once had in the life he chose. Arriving at the estate, Harry entered through a side door. Inside, a skeleton staff had been activated the night before. Rooms were prepared, fireplaces lit. The estate wasn't luxurious in the traditional sense. It was quiet, cold, formal. The kind of place where discussions of abdication or constitutional crisis had once occurred. Fitting, then, that it now played host to a crisis of a different kind. One not about crowns or thrones, but about the collapse of personal truth. For several hours, Harry stayed inside his private quarters. No food requests, no external calls, just isolation. Royal aides, trained in discretion but rattled by the growing scandal, waited in silence for direction. They had been instructed not to engage him unless summoned. And so, the halls remained still. Only the sound of wind against ancient windows and the slow ticking of antique clocks marked time. By mid-afternoon, an envelope was delivered, hand-carried from Clarence's house. No stamp, no courier. Inside, a note from King Charles. Its contents were never made public, but what is known is that it was handwritten, brief, formal, and without embellishment. Charles did not call. He did not visit. He sent words. Whether that was a gesture of discipline or detachment is still debated. But the message it conveyed was unmistakable. You are in crisis, but you are on your own. Harry read it once, folded it, placed it on the desk, and said nothing. Later that evening, after nearly an entire day of silence, he emerged. Dressed in dark slacks and a navy sweater, he walked the long gravel path behind the estate. A path that looped around a wooded glen, marked by centuries-old oaks and forgotten royal markers. It was a place for reflection, used by past monarchs and statesmen. Now, it bore the footprints of a man unraveling quietly under the weight of personal failure. He was seen by a gardener, an older man who had worked on royal grounds for decades. The man later told someone, in hushed tones, that Harry looked like he'd aged 10 years in a day. That his posture had changed. His gait was slower. That whatever fire had once driven him to leave the monarchy, to forge a new path across the Atlantic, now seemed dimmed, nearly extinguished. And yet, he kept walking. Back inside, meetings began to take shape. Senior palace advisors, who had remained in partial contact with Harry's circle despite the Sussex's public split, arrived discreetly. They brought files, analysis, statements to consider, damage control plans, crisis communication frameworks. But Harry refused them. No official statement. No rebuttal. No media spin. At least, not yet. What he reportedly said was simple, direct, and filled with quiet devastation. This isn't a press issue. It's a trust issue. And I don't know who I trust right now. The words landed like a blade. Trust. That was the cornerstone of everything Harry had stood for since leaving. Trust in Meghan. Trust in their shared vision. Trust that walking away from the royal machine meant walking towards something more authentic, more human. But now, that trust had become the most unstable element in his life. He was not naive. Harry had been burned by the press for years. He knew how easily perception could be manipulated. But this was different. This was not an anonymous smear or a paparazzi ambush. This was a betrayal that had come from inside the circle. A leak enabled by a man he once called a friend. And worse. Footage of a woman he had defended at the cost of his entire identity, laughing in the arms of someone whose very presence shredded their credibility. Inside royal circles, the response was icy. Some senior royals refused to speak Harry's name, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion. They had tried, many said, to warn him that the world he entered with Meghan was unstable, performative, dangerously exposed. And now, it was imploding. But others expressed something closer to sorrow. Courtiers who had served Diana decades ago recognized the look in Harry's eyes from a time long past. A boy lost. A man spiraling. Not publicly, but privately. In corridors and gardens, behind windows, and within firelit rooms. There were attempts to intervene. One official close to Charles reportedly pushed for a father-son meeting. But it was rejected, by whom remains unclear. Some say Charles feared being drawn into the scandal by association. Others suggest Harry declined. unwilling to face his father's judgment so soon after feeling humiliated on a global stage. Meanwhile, media speculation surged. Rumors of Harry requesting reinstatement of temporary royal duties. Whispers of him seeking legal separation. Leaks suggesting calls to William had been ignored. All unconfirmed. But the fog of uncertainty only deepened the public fascination. What was confirmed, however, was that Harry had made contact with legal counsel. Not to sue Perry, not to pursue the man in the footage, but to explore what one aide described as protective options. Whether that meant physical protection, media shielding, or a form of temporary royal asylum, no one knew. But it underscored one undeniable truth. He no longer felt safe in the world he had chosen. That night, for the first time in years, Harry stayed in complete royal silence. No statements, no posts, no photos. He did not sleep in a luxury suite. He did not dine with friends. He sat, reportedly, in the estate's library, surrounded by portraits of ancestors, most of whom had lived and died under the same roof of duty he had once fled from. And in that library, surrounded by history, he finally broke. A staff member who brought in tea around midnight found him seated in the corner, face buried in his hands. No sobs, no tears, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after your entire internal world collapses and you don't know what pieces are worth salvaging anymore. He was asked if he needed anything. He shook his head. He remained there until dawn. The flight of fury had ended, but the journey ahead was only beginning. Because going back isn't the hard part. It's deciding whether you ever really left. It wasn't the stone walls or the centuries-old silence of Windsor that chilled Harry to the bone. It was the absence of acknowledgement, the deliberate cold. Not the kind forged by nature, but the kind that emanates from people who have chosen distance over confrontation. The royal family, in its most powerful and unspoken gesture, said nothing. And in that nothingness, everything was clear. In the world Harry was born into, words were rare currency. Feelings, when shown, were considered a lapse. The Windsors did not hug in public. They did not argue where staff could hear. They managed crises with gloved hands, tight lips, and a calm that bordered on surgical indifference. And now, as one of their own returned amidst a scandal that would have cracked any modern family into chaos, they responded the only way they knew how. They closed the gates. There was no greeting party. No tea prepared in a familiar room. No family member awaiting his arrival. Even the household staff seemed to move more quietly than usual, as though instructed to remain invisible. Harry, once their prince, was now an intruder in the house of his birth. Welcomed only in function, not in feeling. The first official sign of royal engagement came 3 days into his return. A note, not a call, was delivered to the estate where Harry was staying. The sender, Buckingham Palace. It was not written by King Charles himself, but by a senior courtier. The contents were coldly procedural, a short paragraph stating that His Majesty had been made aware of the situation, that there would be no comment, and that no further meetings would be scheduled until further notice. It ended with a line that stunned even seasoned aides. His Majesty trusts His Royal Highness will exercise judgment appropriate to his station, both public and private. It wasn't just distance. It was judgment, and more than that, it was isolation as discipline. To those who understood the family's inner mechanics, this was not surprising. The monarchy had always dealt with embarrassment through a singular tactic, ostracism. Not punishment, not forgiveness. Just a strategic, suffocating freeze. Edward VIII had felt it after abdication. Diana had lived through it in the years after her divorce. Even Andrew, disgraced for far more damning behavior, had endured the same glacial treatment before his titles were peeled away. Now it was Harry's turn. This time, though, the coldness hit differently. Because Harry had not simply made a personal mistake. He had placed the institution in proximity to disgrace. The image of a royal duchess caught in compromising closeness with a man from a world diametrically opposed to the monarchy's values was more than scandalous. It was corrosive. And for a family still trying to stabilize under King Charles's leadership, still healing from Queen Elizabeth's passing, this was a humiliation they couldn't afford. Inside the palace, corridors buzzed behind closed doors. Senior aides convened quietly, reviewing fallout strategies, considering the worst-case scenario. The possible dissolution of Harry and Meghan's titles. Not just in press language, but formally, legally. The Sussex title, long controversial since the couple's exit, was now radioactive. Multiple media outlets had already started referring to them without titles. Public opinion was turning. Royal commentators, even those once sympathetic to Harry, began to suggest it was time for a formal severance. But the decision wasn't solely Charles's to make. The government had to be consulted. The Privy Council would need to weigh in. It wasn't a process done lightly. But the conversation had begun, and it did so without Harry in the room. Meanwhile, Harry waited. He paced the garden paths of the estate. He made tea by himself. He reread messages on his phone, most unopened, a few from Fr.